There was no grave, no royal funeral, no monument built in his honor, no ancient document saying, "Here lies Ragnar Lothbrok." Only stories. Stories whispered by terrified monks. Stories sung by Viking poets around burning campfires. Stories written down hundreds of years after his supposed death. Some claim he died laughing, thrown into a pit filled with venomous snakes. Others insist that man never existed at all. Yet more than 12 centuries later, his name still refuses to disappear. Ragnar Lothbrok, a man, a myth, or perhaps something far more dangerous, because sometimes legends change history more than kings ever could. Tonight, we're not just telling the story of Ragnar. We're searching for the truth behind the most famous Viking who ever lived. Chapter 1. When Europe feared the sea. Imagine waking before sunrise. The village is silent. The church bell has not yet rung. A cold mist hangs over the sea. Then, someone notices dark shapes on the horizon. Not merchant ships, not fishing boats. Long, narrow, dragon-headed vessels moving silently through the morning fog. Within minutes, the bells begin to ring. Children start crying. Farmers abandon their fields. Monks rush to hide sacred books and silver crosses. Everyone already knows what is coming. The Northmen, the Vikings. To the people of Europe, they weren't simply raiders. They were punishment from God. Priests described them as demons. Kings feared them. Entire coastlines lived in constant terror. But among all those warriors, one name slowly grew larger than all the others. Ragnar Lothbrok. The problem is, history isn't sure whether that name belonged to one man or many. Chapter 2. The man. History cannot agree on, unlike William the Conqueror, or Julius Caesar, or Genghis Khan. No contemporary document clearly describes Ragnar's life. The earliest detailed stories appear centuries later, in Icelandic sagas written long after the Viking Age. Those sagas paint a remarkable picture: a fearless explorer, a brilliant warrior, a clever king, the father of legendary sons, the terror of England and France. But modern historians remain divided. Some believe Ragnar truly existed, a real Viking leader whose achievements became exaggerated over time. Others believe Ragnar Lothbrok is a legendary figure created by combining the stories of several different Viking chiefs. Think about it. If different heroes become one legend, their victories become greater, their enemies become stronger, their name becomes unforgettable, whether Ragnar was one man or several. His story became the symbol of an entire generation of Vikings, and perhaps that made him even more powerful. Chapter 3. A different kind of Viking. According to the sagas, Ragnar was not satisfied with living the life everyone expected. Most Viking leaders thought the same way: sail, raid, return home, repeat. But Ragnar supposedly asked a dangerous question: what lies beyond the Western Sea? At that time, many sailors hugged the coastline. Open water navigation was terrifying. Storms could destroy entire fleets. No maps existed. No compass pointed the way. Every journey beyond the familiar coastline was a gamble with death. Yet Ragnar believed the greatest rewards belonged to those willing to sail where others refused. Whether that moment happened exactly as the legends describe, we cannot know. But it captures something real about the Viking Age. Its greatest leaders weren't just fearless fighters. They were risk-takers, explorers, men willing to gamble everything for a future nobody else could imagine. Chapter 4. The ship that changed history. Every great dream needs someone capable of building it. The sagas introduce a gifted shipbuilder, a man remembered as Floki. History confirms Vikings built extraordinary longships, fast enough to cross open seas, shallow enough to sail deep into rivers, light enough to be dragged across land. They were engineering masterpieces, Whether Floki personally built Ragnar's ships remains uncertain, but together, their names became inseparable in Viking legend. Without those ships, the Viking Age might never have expanded the way it did. Those wooden vessels carried more than warriors. They carried ideas, ambition, and a future that would reshape Europe forever. Ragnar didn't simply want a better ship. He wanted a different destiny. Chapter 5. The First Journey West. When Ragnar announced his plan, many believed he had lost his mind. Older warriors laughed. Experienced sailors warned him. The Western Sea was unpredictable. If the storms didn't kill them, starvation would. If they survived the ocean, no one knew what awaited them on the other side. But history has always belonged to the people willing to ignore impossible. So Ragnar gathered a small crew, not the largest, not the strongest, only those willing to risk everything. As the sails caught the wind, the coastline slowly disappeared behind them. For the first time, there was no turning back. Ahead lay only endless water, and somewhere beyond that horizon. Chapter 6. The World Beyond the Horizon. The sea had finally rewarded Ragnar's courage. Beyond the endless waves lay a world few Scandinavians had ever seen. A richer world, a larger world, and far more vulnerable than anyone had imagined. For Ragnar, this wasn't the end of a journey. It was the beginning of a revolution. The first raids changed everything. The warriors returned home with silver, jewels, fine weapons, and stories no one could believe. Villages that had laughed at Ragnar now celebrated him. Young men wanted to sail under his command. Old warriors who once doubted him now copied his ideas. One successful voyage had changed the future of the Viking world. Sometimes history turns because of one battle. Sometimes it turns because one man asks a question nobody else dares to ask. Among the earliest and most famous Viking attacks was the raid on Lindisfarne, a quiet monastery on England's northeast coast. It was a place of prayer, learning, and peace. The monks believed its isolation protected it. They were wrong. Dragon-headed ships appeared without warning. Axes smashed through wooden doors. Sacred treasures disappeared. Ancient manuscripts were destroyed. The attack shocked Christian Europe. One monk wrote, "Never before has such terror appeared in Britain." Today, many films and TV series show Ragnar leading this raid. The truth is more complicated. The raid absolutely happened, but no surviving contemporary source names Ragnar as its commander. This is where history and legend begin to overlap. And throughout this documentary, we'll always tell you which is which. According to the Icelandic sagas, Ragnar's reputation spread rapidly across Scandinavia. He wasn't admired simply because he fought well. He was admired because he thought differently. Most Viking leaders searched for treasure. Ragnar searched for opportunity. He believed the sea was not a barrier. It was a road leading toward kingdoms no Viking had yet dared to challenge. That single idea would inspire generations after him. No legendary story is complete without unforgettable companions. Among the names forever linked to Ragnar, one stands above all others, Lagertha. The sagas describe her as a shield maiden, a warrior who fought with courage equal to any man. When Ragnar first encountered her, he didn't meet a queen. He met a fighter, someone who refused to be protected, someone who stood on the battlefield instead of hiding behind it. Whether Lagertha truly existed remains uncertain. Some historians believe she may represent several remarkable women remembered as one. Others believe she belongs entirely to legend. Whatever the truth, she became an inseparable part of Ragnar's story. Later, The sagas introduce another woman, Aslaug, a princess surrounded by prophecy and mystery. Her arrival changed Ragnar's life forever. It also changed his family. From Aslaug came the sons whose names would echo across history: Bjorn Ironside, Ubbe, Sigurd Snake in the Eye, Hvitserk, and perhaps the most mysterious of them all, Ivar the Boneless. Whether every detail surrounding their births is true, no one can say. But history confirms that powerful Viking leaders carrying these names would soon appear across Europe. As Ragnar's fame grew, so did his ambitions. Raiding villages was no longer enough. He began looking toward something larger: cities, kingdoms, even Paris. The Frankish Empire had already suffered Viking attacks before, but now the raids became bolder, better organized, more daring. The city that symbolized royal power found itself facing warriors from the north. Some medieval traditions associate Ragnar with the famous siege of Paris. Other historians argue the commander may have been another Viking leader. Once again, the evidence is incomplete, but one thing is beyond debate. The Vikings proved they could strike at the very heart of Europe's greatest kingdoms, and no name became more closely connected with that fear than Ragnar Lothbrok. By now, Ragnar was no longer remembered simply as a warrior. He had become a leader, a husband, a father, and to many, the living symbol of the Viking age itself. But history has a cruel habit. The higher a man rises, the harder he falls. The victories that made Ragnar famous would soon become the weight he carried on his shoulders. Friends would be lost. Family would drift apart. His faith would be questioned. And the fearless explorer who once challenged the sea would soon be forced to confront something far more terrifying: himself. Chapter 7. The Final Voyage. Years passed. The man who once terrified kingdoms began disappearing long before he ever disappeared from history. The fearless warrior, the explorer, the king, was changing. According to the sagas, Ragnar was no longer chasing glory. He was chasing answers. His closest friend, Athelstan, the Christian monk who had once arrived as Ragnar's prisoner, had become something far greater: a friend, a brother, a man who challenged Ragnar's beliefs about the world. Through Athelstan, Ragnar discovered that enemies could become family, and that faith could wear many faces. When Athelstan died, something inside Ragnar died with him. The laughter faded, the curiosity remained, but the joy disappeared. For perhaps the first time, the greatest Viking of his age looked tired. His sons had become famous warriors. Bjorn carved out his own destiny. Ubbe proved himself a capable leader. Sigurd sought recognition. Hvitserk searched for purpose. And Ivar frightened even Vikings. The world no longer revolved around Ragnar. A new generation had arrived, and every legend eventually faces the same question: what happens when the world no longer needs its greatest hero? Many men would have accepted a quiet life. Not Ragnar. According to the sagas, he gathered a small fleet. Not hundreds of ships, not thousands of warriors, only a handful of loyal companions. His followers were confused. Why sail with so few men? Why attack England again? Was he chasing victory, or was he chasing destiny? Perhaps Ragnar already knew this would be his final voyage. The sea welcomed him once more, the same sea that had carried him toward glory years before. But this journey felt different. The winds were colder, the silence heavier, almost as if the ocean itself understood. It was carrying a legend toward his final chapter. The fleet reached England, but fortune had abandoned him. His ships were scattered, his warriors defeated. For the first time in decades, Ragnar stood powerless, captured, bound in chains. No army to command, no throne to protect him, only his name remained. He was brought before King Ælla of Northumbria, the same kingdom that had suffered Viking raids for generations. Ælla finally looked into the eyes of the man whose name had haunted England for years. To the king, justice had finally arrived, but Ragnar never looked afraid, according to the sagas. He laughed, not because he expected mercy, but because he knew something Ælla did not. Kings can execute a man, they cannot execute an idea. The legends tell us Ragnar was thrown into a pit filled with venomous snakes. Historians cannot confirm every detail. Some believe the snake pit became a powerful symbol added by later storytellers. Others believe the execution may have happened in a different way. The truth has disappeared into history, but the legend survived. And sometimes, legends become more powerful than facts. As the snakes surrounded him, the stories say Ragnar never begged for his life. Instead, he spoke the words that would echo across centuries, how the little pigs would grunt if they knew how the old boar suffers. Those words were not meant for Ælla, they were meant for his sons, Bjorn, Ubbe, Hvitserk, Sigurd, and above all, Ivar. Ragnar wasn't asking to be saved, he was sending a message, a father's final command. History suggests that not long after Ragnar's death, a massive Viking force crossed the North Sea. The English called it the Great Heathen Army. This was no ordinary raid, it was an invasion. Northumbria fell, East Anglia was devastated, Mercia was forced into submission. England changed forever. Several of its leaders were remembered as Ragnar's sons. Whether every one of them truly was his son remains debated. But their victories ensured one thing: Ragnar's story did not end in the snake pit. It had only just begun. The sagas continue with one final act of revenge. King Ælla was captured. They claim he suffered the infamous Blood Eagle, an execution so terrifying that it became one of the most famous stories of the Viking Age. Yet once again, history asks us to be careful. There is no clear contemporary evidence proving the Blood Eagle happened exactly as later writers described. Some historians believe it was real. Others believe it became a literary symbol of ultimate revenge. The mystery remains. So, who was Ragnar Lothbrok? A king, a farmer, a fearless explorer, a brilliant commander, or the combined memory of several Viking leaders whose stories merged into one unforgettable legend? After more than 12 centuries, no one knows for certain. But perhaps that uncertainty is exactly why Ragnar continues to fascinate us, because history preserves facts, legends preserve dreams. One can tell us what happened, the other tells us why people never stopped believing. Today, the kingdoms Ragnar fought have vanished. The Viking Age has long since ended. The longships no longer appear on Europe's shores. Yet one name continues to sail across history. Not because every story can be proven, but because every generation chooses to tell it again. Perhaps that is Ragnar's greatest victory, not England, not Paris, not the treasures he won. His greatest victory was becoming impossible to forget. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this documentary, subscribe to Beyond Empires, because beyond every empire, there is another legend waiting to be uncovered.